Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our databanks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world, and ready to fight for it. Arundhati Roy. We have just lived through a year like no other. The importance of connecting social justice scholars and movement-building organizers has never been greater. Out of conflict and chaos comes some of the most powerful possibilities for change. The Social Justice Initiative at the University of Illinois at Chicago is launching the Portal Project as a response to the urgency of this historical moment. Over the next 2 years, we will invite artists, activists, scholars, and writers to debate, share, think, and strategize. Together, we will imagine a more just and sustainable future. The Social Justice Portal Project is a mobile collaborative think tank that crosses disciplinary and sectoral boundaries. We are excited to announce Angela Davis, Naomi Klein, Robin D.G. Kelly, and Keeanga-Yamahtta Talor as our inaugural cohort of Marielle Franco Fellows. Our goal is to move beyond crisis-driven reactions and single-issue solutions. Using 3 transformative social justice issues as our entry points, abolition, economic democracy, and climate justice, we will explore big and critical questions about systemic change and the climate justice movement's notion of a just transition. How do we journey from injustice to justice? How do we link collective debate, movements, history, and practice in the service of creating a better world? None of us can find solutions alone. We are smarter together. Follow the journey at the Social Justice Portal Project.
Hi, this is Barbara Ransby. I'm the director of the Social Justice Initiative at UIC, University of Illinois at Chicago, and I want to welcome you to today's conversation and program. We have titled this program, The Future of Freedom, Movement Building and Transformative Possibilities. And we have an amazing panel and some presentations before we get into our panel. As you saw from the video, the Portal Project is an exciting experiment, bringing together scholars, artists, and activists to wrestle with critical questions related to racial and social justice. Borrowing from the climate justice movement, we want to ask the question, what does a just transition look like in the 21st century? We are having working groups and curated conversations and public programs like this one. And we're extremely excited about the artists who are animating the conversations and giving us really new visual and audio ways to engage very complex ideas and important ideas. You know, we've lived through a really unsettling time, and we're still living through it with the pandemic, with the uprisings last summer in response to police violence, with the ongoing climate disasters. And we can either be withdrawn, insular, and afraid, or we can look to each other for answers and look to collective answers and embrace the possibilities of change. And so that is what the Portal Project is encouraging us all to do and creating mechanisms for us to do that. And I'm really excited to be a part of it, to work with Angela Davis and Keeanga-Yamahtta Talor and Robin D.G. Kelly, Naomi Klein, Christiane Gomes, and over a dozen artists, as well as over 100 scholars and activist affiliates of the Portal Project who are participating in this 2-year journey with us. So very excited for today's program, very excited for the year and a half that is in front of us, and invite all of you to stay tuned, to connect to our website, to attend the public programs, and to get in touch to let us know what you're doing. So with that, I'll turn to our artist in residence for the Portal Project, an amazing Afro-Puerto Rican artist, lives in upstate New York, but really speaks to the world. She is amazing in her talent and clear and inspiring in her politics. Taina Asili has composed a song especially for the Portal Project, giving us something to think about and fight for in terms of abolition. So I want to turn now to Abolition by Taina Asili.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Taina Asili, and it's such an honor and a privilege to be here with you all today to premiere this song, Abolition, which I wrote in collaboration with the Portal Project. I'm so grateful to be in collaboration with all of you on this journey towards liberation, justice, and healing. Thank you.
Abolition for our full humanity, build new visions of accountability, an invitation to address our needs, prepare communities, create new possibilities. Imagine what would happen if we did divest from the systems that have kept us so oppressed. Imagine just what we would manifest, reclaim our resources and the power we possess. Invest in education for our youth, healthcare, housing, employment, healthy food. Address the harm by reaching to the roots and structures we'll produce without using the master's tools. Dismantling all that disrupts our right to thrive. Devise a plan so we can do more than survive. And with this courage we will organize. We call for abolition, cause we know police and prison will make with a single mission a racist, oppressive system. So we work for abolition, cause we walk in the tradition of those who carried a vision to take us to liberation. So we work for abolition, 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 abolition. We work for abolition. Freedom is a journey, it is not a sprint. This is a process, not just a single event. And we know we must also look within as we build a transformative justice movement. And as we practice a new path will emerge, cycles of violence and harm that we will purge. A commitment to healing will be heard. Love and the people's power will converge to bring an era that goes beyond reform, allows in radical thinking to be born. As we tear down the bars and the borders, fearless foundations of freedom will fall. Oppressive systems we undermine. Look at the flame and follow its light. An abolitionist journey we ignite. We come for abolition, cause we know police and prison will make with a single mission a racist, oppressive system. So we work for abolition, cause we walk in the tradition of those who carried a vision to take us to liberation. So we work for abolition, 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 abolition. We work for abolition. For the ones who are locked up inside, the loved ones who fight for their lives, black lives, criminalized, children stuck in the pipeline, families caged at the border, natives struggle to fight for our water, stolen mothers and daughters, trans lives, targets of torture, for the forebearers who planted seeds, for the march so we could be free, whose descendants knelt down on one knee, for the masses who filled the streets, for the brave ones who broke away, proclaim the power, vision, the new day, for the next generation to say, we come for abolition, cause we know police and we work for abolition, 'cause we walk in the tradition of those who carried a vision to take us to liberation. So we come for abolition, 'cause we know police and prison were made with a single mission, a racist, oppressive system. So we work for abolition, 'cause we walk in the tradition of those who carried a vision to take us to liberation. So we work for abolition, 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 abolition. We work for abolition. No justice. No justice.
Deep gratitude to Taina Seeley for sharing her brilliance with us. A free download of Taina's song, Abolition, is available on the Portal Project's digital hub, and the link should be available to you in the chat. My name is Noor Shawaf, and I'm the Director of Special Projects at SJI. It's my deep privilege to be part of the Portal Project team as we bring together organizers, scholars, activists, artists, and other partners. The Portal Project's collective inquiry seeks to find shared ground while leaving space for critical debate in order to create opportunities for social justice that is both sustainable and transformative. Central to this movement-centered work is our cohort of 20 Margaret Burroughs Fellows, named in honor of Dr. Burroughs' legacy as an activist, visionary educator, and people's artist. The Margaret Burroughs Fellows are community organizers and activists from across the country who are committed to racial justice, alternative formations, immigrant rights, climate justice, and other sites of struggle. The Burroughs Fellows are central to building connections across movement and between theory and practice in this collective work. We're excited for the many threads of the Portal Project to weave together with their help. And one of the ways that this is happening is through this collaborations like with the artist Taina Seeley. And we're going to watch now some clips from a series of interviews that Taina conducted for films that she's making inspired by the inquiry and dialogues within the Portal Project. And the two films we're about to watch feature two Margaret Burroughs Fellows who are very dear to us, all of whom are dear to us, Derica Purnell and Graisa Martinez Rosas. So please enjoy.
My name is Derica Purnell. I'm a lawyer, organizer, and author of Becoming Abolitionist, Police, Protest, and the Pursuit of Freedom. My entire life, I had this conception of imagination as something quite beautiful, right? I thought that imagination was something that children did or people who believe in freedom and injustice did. I've learned that imagination is quite neutral. The state imagines all sorts of ways to police us, to incarcerate us, to segregate us, to repress us, to colonize us, right? We have to have so much more of a robust imagination at our disposal, at our will, because if we don't, then the state's imagination, the imagination of capitalists, the imagination of the people who have the resources to exploit, is just going to continue to trump our own. And I think it has only been the imagination of so many people whose backs were against the wall, who just weren't sure how they were going to find their next meal, who weren't going to be sure if they were going to know what the taste of freedom felt like, who just weren't even sure if they were going to live. And it wasn't that they were sure that their imagination or that their wildest dreams would come true. It was that their imagination and their will, it lied in their commitment to doing the exercise in the first place, right? And in that commitment, there was also a commitment to experiment, to try, right? And I just honestly don't know where we would be without that imagination and without that will to at least try to say, I don't know what's on the other side of this. I don't know what's on the other side of this plantation, this wall, this border, but I absolutely know that I'm not going to continue to do this.
My name is Gracia Martinez Rosas. I am undocumented, unafraid, queer, and unashamed, and I have the honor to serve as the Executive Director of United We Dream and United We Dream Action. There are many opportunities within the immigrant justice movement right now, but there's also a lot of complexities. Some of them are, this deep understanding that we have to have as an immigrant justice movement to see our work connected to this project of racial justice work, of undoing anti-Blackness in our systems, of ensuring that we're addressing the root causes of migration, because we know that migration is a natural phenomenon that will never stop. People will come and people will go. And part of our project in this moment is to not only talk about immigrant justice and racial justice are connected and like family members, but actually they're the same fight. There are people that are benefiting from the subjugation of undocumented people in the U.S. There are corporations that are benefiting from our labor, from our ability to remain in fear and in the shadows. People are making money off of that. When you're seeing this idea bubble and bubble within the immigrant justice movement, that our fights are connected and that we are winning towards creating a multiracial, working class, unified force so that we can win. At United We Dream, we believe that those closest to the pain are also closest to the solution, the innovations, and the breakthroughs. The most strategic decision that we can make as a movement, because we have seen the rise of white supremacy, the rise of and the weaponization of white supremacy in our communities at larger scales that we have ever seen before. Just one example is the ICE and CBP, these agents that come to that are responsible for the detention and the deaths of undocumented people in the U.S., their budget has risen to more than $25 billion in the last 15 years. It's the same forces. It's the same people that want to take my right to be able to have the ability to choose. It's the same people that deported and detained my dad, the same people that are detaining black women and black men in jails right now. And so our ability to win is just only as sharp as our ability to stay united, to understand that though there are differences in our experiences, that it's going to be important to follow the leadership of Black people, of Indigenous people, of people whose lives are at the most marginalized and that are also closest to the sharpest strategy that have delivered time and time again for the people.
Greetings. My name is Essence McDowell, and it is a great honor to be connecting here with you today. I'm the Communications Director for the Social Justice Initiative, and as we conceptualize the development of the Portal Project, we envisioned a space for activists and organizers that allowed for a deepening of investigations into prevailing social justice issues. And as this vision evolved, we knew that intellectual engagement would have to be an internal process and also accessible to a wide range of audiences. We sought to find ways to ensure that the conversations that were taking place amongst the Portal Project, scholars and movement builders across the nation, reached inside of your neighborhoods, cities, homes, and much more expansively into a global sphere. And while we will continue to host public events like today's Future of Freedom, we decided to develop a platform that could become a tool that provided ongoing connectivity with the social justice research, data, artistic projects, and themes. So we created the Portal Project Digital Hub. The Digital Hub allows for visitors to connect with us and the Portal Project Network by sharing questions and ideas that the think tank explores. The Hub is a space for public engagement with our nearly 100 participants who stem from dynamic institutions, centers, organizations from around the nation. It's an interactive tool, and it encompasses artistic renderings, a social justice podcast, and so much more. One of the most important elements that we decided to build into the hub was a way to provide public access to data collection and educational resources that can inspire the solutions and big ideas needed to build a more just future. This resource portion of the hub is a collection of videos, articles, and texts recommended and authored by Portal Project participants and fellows. These resources serve as a bridge to our visitors and connect them to the reservoirs of knowledge that are coming from multiple communities in different parts of the country. Beyond the three main content areas of the Portal Project, which are abolition, climate justice, and economic democracy, the resource archive also includes additional areas that reflect scholarship around Black queer feminism, settler colonialism, disability justice, electoral politics, just to name a few. These critical social justice areas on the website, on the digital hub, represent flashpoints of struggle, protest, and change. The Portal Project Hub is an excellent source for justice-centered communal, academic, and creative materials for your syllabus, reading groups, public education projects, and community forums. And we're now live at sjiportalproject.com. Today is the first day that we are releasing access to the hub, and so please do visit the site. You'll be one of the first. I encourage you to also check back to the site over the rest of the year, as we'll be constantly releasing updates, new resources, upcoming events, and artistic projects. So we're going to take a short pause because our panelists will be joining us and we will continue the discussion. So just stay put just for a couple minutes and we'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Barbara Ransby. I'm so happy to be with you today for this important panel hosted by the Portal Project. We are really, really thrilled to have Angela Davis, Amna Akbar, Jacinta González, and Keeanga-Yamahtta Talor to be in conversation with us under the title, The Future of Freedom. How do we do movement building toward transformative justice? We're going to have an interactive conversation, and then we're going to allow for questions and answers. As you've seen, if you have been watching for the last half hour, the Portal Project is a movement-centered think tank that's wrestling with questions of abolition, climate justice, and economic democracy. And we really are looking at issues of what is this moment that we're in, what are the movements that are trying to facilitate progressive change, and what might the future look like. So I'm going to introduce our panelists and then we'll begin our conversation. And again, it's an amazing group, all of whom I have great respect for. Angela Davis is one of our most esteemed and respected thinkers and organizers in the freedom movement in this country and really a symbol all around the world for over 50 years. She's a cutting-edge feminist scholar, author of many books, from Women, Race, and Class to Freedom is a Constant Struggle. Founding member of Critical Resistance and leader of the abolitionist movement and a committed internationalist. She is also a professor emerita at University of California, Santa Cruz. Welcome to the conversation, Angela. Keeanga-Yamahtta Talor is a historian, an organizer, former Chicago and now transplanted to Princeton, New Jersey, where she is an assistant professor in the history department at Princeton. She's written a number of books, and the book that she's most noted for, A Race for Profit, How Banks and Real Estate Industry Undermine Black Home Ownership, has won numerous awards, a finalist for the Pulitzer, a semi-finalist for the National Book Award. She's received a Guggenheim and most recently a MacArthur Genius Award. We're very proud of her and most proud of the organizing work that she has done and the ongoing commitment to struggle, to social change, and to grassroots organizations. Next, we have Jacinta González. Jacinta is a senior organizer for Mi Gente. She has worked around a number of issues, from climate justice to gender justice to immigrant rights. Mi Gente itself works at the intersection of climate, gender justice, and immigration. Jacinta has worked on the border with Poder, working toward stopping mining companies and their contamination of water. And she's also worked with day laborers in New Orleans in the post-Katrina New Orleans, I should say. We're very, very happy to have Jacinta, who is also one of our Margaret Burroughs Fellows. Finally, Amna Akbar. Amna Akbar is a legal scholar and a law professor at Ohio State University, and is an organizer and on the advisory board of Law for Black Lives. She is a Portal Project affiliate. She's on the law faculty at Ohio State University Moritz College of Law, and her scholarship explores the intersections of national security, criminal law, and the potential of social movements to transform our thinking about law, law enforcement, and law reform. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Nation, as well as a number of law review publications. So that is our pretty amazing panel, and I'm really happy to kick off this conversation today. How y'all doing? Everybody good, right?
Good.
Yes, yes, yes. So I want to start with you, Angela, and ask you to talk a little bit about historical context. You know, you have said and written in a number of places, you know, this is a unique historical moment. It is offering us opportunities for change like we haven't seen in quite some time. And I'm wondering if you can just say a little bit about that, about this moment of conjuncture and how we might see it, both as scholars of social change and also as organizers and activists. And welcome, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Barbara. You know, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this conversation. And I'm really honored to be present with all of the panelists. Just as we could have done a lot more 50 years ago if we knew then what we know now. But then, of course, imagining ourselves backwards in history is only an exercise because we could have never had the insights we have now without the passage of time and without the process of learning from history. And of course, you're the historian, so you know that better than anyone else. But I do think that it's sometimes productive to engage in these kinds of exercises, however abstract they might be, because there are things to learn. It helps us, I think, to recognize the value of critique. And of course, this is a very different kind of conjuncture from 50 years ago. 50 years ago, there was a great deal of hope for revolutionary change. And perhaps because of the fact that change was happening all over the world. The African liberation movements were moving forward. We identified with the movements in Angola, in Mozambique, in Guinea-Bissau, and of course in South Africa. And then of course there was Cuba that demonstrated that it was possible to build a socialist revolution 90 miles from the US. And of course, I as I say this, I remember how convinced we were that change had to happen, and that socialism was going to come to this country. And it was largely based on our internationalism. And I say that because I think it's important today to learn from that internationalism that animated the movements 50 years ago. And of course, at that time, so many of our communities were very receptive to revolutionary ideas. The Puerto Rican community, we were fighting for the freedom of Lolita Lebron, the Black community, of course, and we knew that we needed change. We knew that we were not willing to live with the prevailing conditions of poverty, of capitalism, of racism. But then, of course, our consciousness was vastly underdeveloped in so many areas. Gender, sexuality, ability, climate. So I could go on talking about what we know now that we did not know then. But I would say that I think it's so important always to think within historical context and not look at these moments as isolated. Having been active in the 60s, I can remember that the McCarthy era was so close to us, and we were thinking about, how to extricate ourselves from the terrors of the McCarthy era. And we were also inspired by what we knew about what had unfolded during the 1930s. We learned from our elders who had participated in the movements then, where the climate of anti-capitalism was far more expansive. The rise of unions, the CIO organizing industrial unions, which had brought large numbers of Black people into the labor movement. So I would say that today, rather than simply comparing this era to the 60s, I think we should ask how we are fulfilling the promises of those struggles, some of which have not even been formulated yet, promises that we can only realize retroactively. I guess let me just say to conclude that change never happens without backlash, without movement backward. And I think what's so important about this moment is that unprecedented numbers of people who's have changed their ideas and their consciousness. I'm thinking about the fact that, what was it, about a week ago, the Metropolitan Opera staged an opera by a Black composer for the very first time in its history, Terence Blanchard. That means that something has shifted. But we can't assume that these shifts will be permanent. And we can't assume that these shifts will lead to even greater changes unless we do the work. And so we need formations like the ones that that you have created, the Portal Project, the Social Justice Initiative, to make sure that we continue to build on what we have achieved in the past.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. As you're speaking, the similarities and the differences, right? So the repression, the sort of specter of McCarthyism that in some ways the 60s broke with, the resistance movements of the 60s broke with. And here we see, the growth of new movements now at the same time, new forms of pretty relentless repression and backlash. But then you and I have talked about this too, the really sharp feminist consciousness in this movement, which of course is inspired a lot by your work and example, but also, there's just a whole generation that is not adding feminism and gender and sexuality issues on, from the back burner, but putting them center stage in all of the demands and all of the platforms that are coming forward. I want to ask you one more question, Angela, before I go to Amna. You and I were doing a program together a number of years ago, and either I asked you or someone asked both of us about optimism. And you had a wonderful answer that I want to ask you to elaborate on now about sort of an intergenerational view of winning. Because sometimes we think that struggles are going to pay off right now. We're going to arrive. We're going to win. We're going to, be in freedom land or whatever. But having this kind of long-term, even beyond our own lifetime, notion of winning allows us to be optimistic in ways that a short-term vision doesn't. Can you just say a little bit more about that?
Okay, and
I'm
not
paraphrasing you.
Exactly. You might be able to say it better than I
You were
can.
talking about indigenous communities and what we can learn from indigenous communities that have this sort of, many of which have this sort of, very, cross-generational notion of struggles and the continuation of struggles. It was when we were in New Mexico. It was just very.
Oh, that seems like it was eons ago.
See, you're putting out so much brilliance, you don't remember it.
No, but I think I was talking about the importance of changing our temporalities.
Yes.
And not thinking within the context of what you might call capitalist temporalities that are based on the individual and a single lifetime, and about being able to accomplish things on the market within the context of a particular individual life. I think I was talking about the importance of thinking in terms of generations and asking ourselves how the work I do now will affect generations to come, recognizing that we are here today, able to be involved in the kinds of movements that we're involved in today because of those who came before us. We're realizing the dreams of our ancestors. I like that slogan. You see that T-shirt sometimes that says, "I am my ancestors' wildest dream." But I just want to say that the optimism that I've embraced, it's not an abstract optimism. It's an optimism based on the fact that I have been able to witness this work and feel a part of it. First of all, you, Barbara, I met you when you were a graduate student.
Long time ago.
A long time ago.
Yeah.
And so it gives me hope to have witnessed your development and to, witness, all of the contributions with your amazing brilliance that you're making, that you've decided to dedicate yourself to these movements. And of course, I always evoke Gramsci and his notion that we must combine a pessimism of the intellect. We have to be willing to do the kinds of analysis that are not through rose-colored lens, that are prepared to understand the dangers, for example, of the consolidation of white supremacy and the right wing. But at the same time, as we have pessimism of the intellect, we have optimism of the will. And that is the hope that we have to cultivate. I like Mariam Kaba's notion that hope is a discipline, that we have to create that optimism, create that hope. And that is what allows us to move from one generation to the next and move hopefully toward an abolitionist futures.
That's a great note to shift to Amna, and thank you for that. That was, you were talking about temporalities, and I think you also quoted Gramsci in that conversation. But Amna, talking about optimism of the will, and also I'm thinking of Dr. King's expression, the fierce urgency of now. The article you wrote a little while ago in New York Times, "The Left is Winning," got a lot of traction. And you make the case there that, maybe sometimes we underestimate, even in this moment, how much we're winning or how much the world has changed because of the work that progressive and left organizers are doing in it. Can you speak to that on this theme of optimism and the forward trajectory of social justice movements?
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. So in that article, I was making the observation.
Okay, we're having a little audio. I don't know if everyone's having it, but I think the
Are you having to hear me now?
Can anyone else? Can you all hear her?
I can hear you, but you sound like an alien.
Yes, you're garbled.
Okay, hold on. I'll take off my headphones.
Is this better?
It sure
Yes.
is.
All right, perfect. Okay, so in the Times piece, I was making the observation that over the last few decades, the left has shifted away from kind of an armchair politics of critique, an essentially discursive and defensive project, to one now for the last decade or so that joins ideological and material struggle, defensive projects with affirmative political projects, appreciating the connection between small to large, leaving no strategy or tactic on the table because it somehow sacrifices our ideological purity, and shifting towards mass politics. And of course, as Angela was just making very clear, people in social movement organizations were doing really important work for the last several decades, and I would never suggest that that wasn't the case, organizing campaigns in their own right, and of course, seeding this moment. Critical Resistance, founded in the late 1990s, is of course one example. DSA is another, which has been around since the late 1970s and 1980s. These organizations weren't dormant for those decades, but doing a different kind of work, a difficult and sacred labor of building formations in the ashes of the long civil rights movement and the New Left, burnt out, crushed by COINTELPRO, on a smaller scale in a repressive environment defined still by the Cold War and the rise of neoliberalism, and then by 9/11 and the war on terror. And so over the last few decades, we've kind of seen these cumulative waves of investments in military, police, prisons, jails, and war, divestment from the social and the collective. And so it's all a long way of saying resistance and organizing is always present, but there are different phases and spaces of struggle. Some waves are bigger than others, but the waves kind of feed into one another and are always in relation. And so today, there's, like I was saying, there's kind of been this pivot towards mass politics on the left. And what I mean by that is that more and more people on the left are investing and being sustained by political, economic, and social work that's attempting to shift politics, economics, and the social and ideological writ large, not just to convince our closest friends or the people who already belong to our organizations, but to build and participate in movements, organizations, building infrastructure, waging experiments, and promoting the kind of ideological shifts we need to make us and people in our communities make sense of the world around us and the world that we're fighting for, so that there's a broader kind of popular consciousness and will and commitment to a shared political project on a mass scale of the sort that we need to confront capital. Mm-hmm. So part of that pivot has been this turn to demands, right, which is what I wrote about, and related to that, electoral politics, right? So all this kind of push of candidates from the left. Even our more anarchist friends, for example, around the country have been engaged in local battles and city politics, for example, to shut down local jails, to defund the police, and demand participatory budgeting. And so across the left, a decade after Occupy, we're living in a moment of demands. No new jails, defund the police, cancel rent, land back, Green New Deal, a socialist Green New Deal, the Red Deal, the Red, Black, and Green New Deal, protect the right to organize act, and I could go on. And we can have debates over which of these are reformist versus non-reformist reforms. We could debate Andre Gorza's formulation, focused on whether the demand undermines capital, empowers workers, expands democracy, brings socialism within reach. Ruth Wilson Gilmore and Critical Resistance's definitions, which are focused on whether the demand undermines the power, resources, and legitimacy of the prison industrial complex. Is Gorza or Gilmore right? Are they compatible? Do we need a new synthesis for this conjuncture? These are important debates to have, and partly through these demands and campaigns that are happening across the country, we're having these debates because we have shared concepts across the growing left about how to reject conventional kind of conceptions of liberal reform or political action, which is, of course, bolstered the power of capital in the carceral state. It suggests, all of this kind of suggests a development, a set of relationships, a shared posture around political, economic, and social action of a sort that contests formal power in direct and confrontational ways without conceding to formal process in a simple way. And so if I can just spell that out a little bit, there are some things I think from the demands that left movements are making that are quite different from kind of conventional reform. And I think some of this is getting lost in the way that the Democratic Party has been trying to respond to and crush the movement to defund the police and abolitionist organizing. So first, from like a liberal perspective, liberals tend to insist that you use formal politics and process to make change. You plead with your city council member, your congressional representative, maybe you file a lawsuit. So you're told essentially trust the political class, use their processes, and they're going to enact the public good. But of course, for the left and a lot of the public, and that's important that it's not just us broader public. We know the political class can't be trusted to act on behalf of the public interest, human need, or the planet. And so movements in their demands aren't just relying on formal politics. And so alongside testifying at city council, people are protesting, engaging in direct action, building mutual aid networks and bail funds and transformative justice hubs. People are using inside and outside strategies, affirmative and defensive tactics. So that's one part, is kind of like thinking about it in the context of a more unruly kind of toolkit of strategies and tactics.
Well, can you take a pause there? Because I wanted to, I think you've touched on a lot. And I wanted to kind of bring other people in too, and really around this question of outside, inside, because it seems to me, we're in a different political moment. We're in a different moment. We're always in a different moment, right? That's what history is. But but we're in a unique moment in terms of electoral work. And I watched last week, Cori Bush, Pramila Jayapal, these women tell their stories about sexual violence, for example, in Congress in ways that just expanded the possibility of what's allowed, what experiences get brought to the table. So changing that milieu, at the same time being very movement focused and not, at least so far, not getting sucked into the vortex, of the Democratic Party. So I kind of want to, before, and I know you have some more points, but let's try to weave them into conversation with the others. Just speaking of the shifting political poles and looking at the relationship of movements to the electoral arena and what's happening with the Squad and the Progressive Caucus and people like Cori Bush that have been elected to Congress. How are you all seeing that? I can go to you first, Keeanga. We haven't heard from you, and I have to apologize. I said you were an assistant professor and you're a full professor. I'm so sorry. Your meteoric rise was so dazzling that I was still.
No, the more important correction is I'm in the Department of African American Studies, not history. Department. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Good for you.
Yes, exactly. So I think, I don't know. I mean, I'm troubled. I think that what we saw in 2020, in the summer of 2020, there are like two things, because what we saw in the summer of 2020 was really the power that social movements can wield. The way, if we think about the way that Joe Biden, who earlier that spring and winter, really before the pandemic presented itself, he was on the right wing of the Democratic Party primary. His campaign was framed around, I'm not going to change much. And he was able to secure the nomination as a kind of buffer to the political insurgency represented within the Democratic Party, represented by Bernie Sanders. However, because of the rebellion and then the summer of unprecedented protests, 15 to 26 million people involved in protest, he was forced to change that because there was a realization that just holding on to the status quo was not going to be enough to actually mobilize people to get rid of Trump. And that was a successful venture. The problem is, I think that there has been some level of capture of the movement. We have a dangerous dynamic in this country that I have not quite figured out, which is that the Republican Party is becoming more outwardly reactionary, embracing white supremacy, a complete and total vehicle for the most fringe elements of the right in the broader society. They work hand in glove with the Republican Party. So you have that on the one hand. On the other hand, the Democratic Party is a kind of weird big tent that its politics are muddled when not backward. Here you have a Democratic Party majority that they are unable to seize that to actually change things in the Senate. So And part of the problem is that the mobilizations that happened in the summer of 2020 have been demobilized as a mass force. Of course, there are all kinds of local initiatives, local organizing, but the kind of mass force that we saw in the summer of 2020 has not yet materialized again. So at this critical moment where this, you know, the big spending package is on the table, the crisis, the deepening crisis of climate, a summer of California on fire in Oregon has materialized. The eviction crisis is here. When we are at the precipice of all of these crises, where's the mobilization? Abortion rights.
Yeah.
Where's the mobilizations?
Well, there were 20,000 people in DC last week and 600 demonstrations. We got to have the pessimism of intellect and the optimism of the will.
I'm the pessimism.
You got the pessimism of intellect. Let's roll on to the optimism of the will.
It's not gratuitous pessimism. It is just, we have to deal with this issue of our movements falling into do we have a seat at the table now? Right? We have a seat at the table now. Should we take the pressure off? I don't know. So
I think you're raising too what is sort of the state. We talk about movement, but there really isn't a single movement, formation, big tent, et cetera. So, we have multiple movements moving sometimes in very different directions at different pace, et cetera. So, I think that kind of critique is really important. But I think it also stands with Amna's, more sort of optimistic narrative about what has shifted, right? And it's a push and a pull. Jacinta, we lost you for a minute. I'm glad we got you back. I wanted to talk a little bit. I want to keep the big picture and also talk about concrete stuff, because we did see some mobilization around the atrocious scene in Del Rio, Texas, not long ago, with primarily Haitian migrants being whipped by white men on horses. We see the ongoing immigration crisis with all of our undocumented family and the migration issue all around the world. And you've been literally on the front lines of that struggle. And I think, we ground ourselves in the concrete struggles as we also, try to construct and understand this meta narrative about how things change. But can you ground us a little bit? What is going on with immigration now, and why is this, or should this be, a central issue to the larger movement for social justice and transformation? And I'm glad you're back with us.
Yeah, I'm sorry for the Wi-Fi issues.
That's all right.
I think what's helpful for folks to understand about the what's currently happening at the border is really understanding what's been happening for federal immigration policy in the last 30 plus years. And I think there's been this conversation of, we will allow a pathway to citizenship for a couple of folks, right, that we consider deserving, that we consider worthy of citizenship, while at the same time having this trade-off that actually means for everyone else that is not deemed worthy, there will be more criminalization, more detention centers, and there will be a more militarized border to stop folks from coming back in. And so what that's kind of one immigrant rights movement, but also really the creation of police forces just dedicated to immigration. Post 9/11, when we see the formation of the Department of Home ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and a much more militarized border patrol. You see a huge boom in policing. You start to see a huge connection between deportation and detention. But you see more and more efforts being invested in militarizing the border. And for us, it's been important.
Well, maybe the producer might have some ideas about joining and rejoining for Jacinta, but raising this question of migration, surveillance, at the same time, we've seen some incremental changes. And I didn't want to leave abruptly that larger question I wanted to pose to everyone about, how are these new progressives in positions of electoral power responding to backlash, responding to movement demands. I don't know if Amna or Angela, you want to pick up on what Keeanga was saying earlier, while we wait for Jacinta to join us again. Any thoughts about the Cori Bushes and the AOCs and what they're doing with the national discourse?
Well, may I say something about the difference between movements and mobilizations?
Yes.
I think it's so important not to mistake the movement for the mobilizations.
Absolutely.
And to recognize that, and this is something that I've discovered over time, that that most of the time the really important work happens when we're not out in the street.
Mm-hmm.
When we're out there making ourselves heard and seen. That is what John Berger called the rehearsal, for the change. It's not. It's very important to recognize that the work that happens when we're not seen in the public is perhaps the most important work of change. What does it mean to have given people all over this country and a mandate to begin to change their institutions, to begin the process of identifying racism, and of course, most of us in this group hope that identification of racism involves racial capitalism and involves an understanding that racism cannot be effectively challenged without also challenging heteropatriarchy and capitalism, especially. So I think that there's a lot of really interesting work happening now that we won't necessarily see in the public. And it's important to encourage people to do that work. I'm remembering years ago when you remember at the University of Missouri, after they forced the president to resign.
Yes.
And I happened to go in the aftermath of all of this, and people were really upset that moment was no longer there. And I had to try to point out that we can't live at that level of intensity all the time.
Right.
And we can't assume that nothing has happened once our movements settle into the work of doing unglamorous projects that can actually really bring about change. And so what that means is that instead of simply looking at the people in Washington, and it's great that Cori Bush is there. I was so happy to see that she was elected and all the rest of the squad. But at the same time, we can't count on them as individuals. We have to do the work to allow them to make their statements. And at the same time, we have to say that the Democratic Party is not going to lead us to freedom. We can't keep demanding that the Democratic Party do work that we know they're not going to do because they are so totally entangled with the whole system of capitalism.
Yeah.
So I think what we have to encourage is a complex analysis and vision of what is happening, to be able to identify the possibilities of lasting change that might be rooted in the work that we do now.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to invite either Amna or Keeanga to weigh in. Keeanga, I'm thinking about, I wanted to ask you about, your deep study of the long durée of housing struggles, for example, and Amna, your work in, with radical lawyers and a lot of plotting and mobilizing, but organizing quietly and behind the scenes that people have done for many, many years in both those arenas. I don't know if either of you want to speak to. I'm pulling the optimist out of you, Keeanga.
Let me just say that I agree a lot with what Angela's saying. I think part of my point is not that we need constant mobilizations, although I think that we actually do need the pressure of consistent presence around some of these issues. But for me, probably the bigger issue is what do we build out of those moments? I mean, there are a proliferation of small and important organizations that are doing the type of work that Angela and Amna and have described, and that Jacinta herself is deeply involved with. But I also think that we need bigger organizations, that we need the capacity to generalize our experiences. This is a huge country, from one place to another, and that we need to take seriously, more seriously, I think, some of the political debates that genuinely exist in the movement, for which there are very few forums in which we can engage them. Questions about electoralism, questions about the relationship between our movements and the Democratic Party. Of course, most people who are engaged in this work don't think the Democratic Party is a vehicle for meaningful social transformation, and yet we see also this proliferation of political campaigns that, because of the archaic party system in this country, are forced to run in the Democratic Party in order to meaningfully participate in electoral politics. And so what impact does that have on the independence of our movement? But these are questions that we have to be able to take up, and that there are too far and few serious political forums and ongoing political engagement about these questions. And so those are some of the things that I am concerned about, that mean that we fall into familiar habits without, in the absence of these. And the familiar habit is to say, oh, 2022 midterm elections, we can't let the Republicans gain any seats in the House or the Senate. Maybe that means that, now we're going to focus on voter registration in lieu of this other thing. Mm-hmm. Or in whatever manifestation it is, does our other kinds of organizing become subsumed to that because of the urgency that we feel because of the troglodytes in the Republican Party? And we'll feel it again in 2022, because then there's a presidential election around the corner. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's this cycle that we remain stuck in that makes it very hard for an independent organizing and mass movement to take firm hold of a situation and grow in the way that matches where public consciousness is at, which is with us. Is largely with us.
Well, I think you're describing a danger of succumbing to and being overtaken by the electoral work. I still think it's important in ways that I probably haven't at other periods in my life, but I also see a lot of grassroots organizing. Here in Chicago, the Equity and Transformation is an organization of formerly incarcerated people doing really good organizing work on the ground. Black Abolitionist Network, Black Feminist Futures. I mean, these are grassroots groups that aren't running candidates. They're not in the news, but that's the kind of, I think, ongoing work that Angela was referring to before, that a lot of times we forget about it because there's not a light shining on it, But let me, I'm going to give everyone a chance to have final comments at the end, but we did promise people the opportunity for questions. Amna, did you want to weigh in on this, or you want to wait?
Weigh in, Amna.
Okay. Well, if you want to, or you'll have time later too.
I'll weigh in a little bit here. So, I think to reframe what I said earlier, but in response to what Angela and Keeanga have been talking about, I think one of the things that's exciting, and it feels like kind of new collective muscles that we're flexing, and again, I don't mean to suggest brand new, but like we haven't flexed them, a lot of us, for a long time, is precisely to kind of proliferate our imaginations and our practices with various sorts of political exercises, like political education groups, mass protests, participating in moments of rebellion, building mutual aid networks, building transformative justice hubs, like all those kinds of things, making demands on the state, putting out manifestos to organize our communities around, that sort of thing. These are things that, yeah, I mean, throughout my life, they've been happening on a small scale, but they're happening in a way right now where it feels like those of us who are in, you know, in kind of like the liberal to left space, and I mean kind of like questioning liberals, you know, are kind of learning together. Because as much as I think, you know, the history of the left in the United States and around the world is so important to how we think about what we do now, and there's so much to learn, there also are not answers in that history about what we do now. And so experimentation and practice and having those spaces that Keeanga was talking about to ask difficult questions, I think is really important, which is part of the reason why the Portal Project is important. But I think as we proliferate our strategies and tactics and regain familiarity with many of them, I do think there's a strong pull towards electoralism and demands and reformism. And so as much as I think the challenge right now seems to be to kind of balance the excitement and enthusiasm that sometimes, you know, some of us feel with like seeing AOC at a mic or something like that, and, you know, some small success in a defund or no new jail campaign, that sort of thing, with making sure that we don't focus all of our energies on that and continue to kind of be in this mode of proliferation.
Thank you. That's a good segue to the first question. It's a big question. I'm going to try to, you know, pare it down. But the question is about the state and this moment and issues of imagination. And the person says, are we in a moment when the future of the institution of the state and its hold on people's imagination as the avenue for change is shifting, if not crumbling? And then goes on to speak about, you know, the period of the pandemic when kind of new social relations emerge, new forms of creative activism emerged, and so forth. And people ask fundamental questions about, you know, kind of work and life and identity, I guess. So any thoughts about that? Are we in a moment when the future of the institution of the state and its hold on people's imagination as the avenue for change is shifting, if not crumbling? Thoughts on that?
Okay, I can say a few words because I do think that it is important to be critical and to recognize that the institutions that appear to be permanent based on our experiences are actually historically produced, and they do not have to be with us forever. Of course, this is the perspective we take on the prison. Prison industrial complex, on policing. This is about the abolitionist imagination, and I think we have to extend that to the state and to recognize that the bourgeois nation state will not be with us on this earth forever. It is not. It came into being relatively recently with capitalism, and so that if we are going to, you know, flex the muscles to, you know, use the words that Amna has been encouraging us to use of our imagination, then we have to be willing to problematize the state. We have to be willing to try to imagine a world without a state, without the nation state. And of course, this helps us also to think very differently about the issue of migration. That, as Jacinta pointed out, is a global issue. We're talking about the long-term impacts of colonialism, of racism and colonialism, slavery and colonialism. So I think it's really important for us to think in those in that long-term way. To even if we are aware of the fact that the state is not going to disappear, in the next period. But we cannot base our thinking and our hopes for the future on the continued presence of the bourgeois nation state.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can I just say really
Yeah.
quick?
Mm-hmm.
I think that the level of cynicism and distrust about the state is quite high, but that can also cut in different directions, and not all of it is progressive. Which is to say that there is a huge contingent of the right that denounces every kind of state action as in libertarian terms or in completely reactionary terms. And so the point then isn't to hold up the state as sacrosanct, but is to really engage in an argument about the utilization of the resources that this country has to mitigate suffering and inequality as it exists, not as a means to an end, but as a strategy that can then help us open a much wider discussion about the role of the state, about permanent access to the resources of the earth that does not have to be leveraged or mitigated through the apparatuses of the state. So in that sense, there is an opportunity that exists now for us to engage in these kinds of political discussions and debates, which for me, again, gets back to the importance of organization and having the political tools to engage the debate and to shape public ideas and perception around these types of questions in ways that we don't necessarily have on a much broader scale right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a balance, right? That people have to walk and chew gum politically at the same time. That we can't let the state off the hook. And I think sometimes some of the we can do it ourselves self-help stuff is sort of like leaving the resources of the state, which people ought to rightly have claim to, right? And then the other extreme is, of course, being sucked in to think that the Democratic Party is going to solve our problems, which clearly, as has been pointed out, is not the case. So striking that balance of waging a struggle in that arena, but certainly not seeing that as the only arena, the arena. Jacinta's back with us, and I wanted to, we lost you to technology, which is always supposed to serve us 100% and doesn't. And so we want to just bring you back in and to say a little more about whatever of this that you want to weigh in on. We're talking now about one of the questions about the state and how people see the state as a resource. I don't know if you want to relate that to the immigration rights stuff and, both the public pressure and the grassroots mobilizations that have been so important, as well as a kind of legislative front, multiple tactics in that struggle. But whatever you want to finish up with your comment from before is fine.
Hoping the Wi-Fi will allow me to at least get a few thoughts in.
Yes, yes, I hope so.
That's it a little bit better. So even if you can't see me, hopefully you can hear.
Yes.
Yeah.
Things that I want to say is that, one, it's been really I would have never imagined that a couple of years ago that folks were screaming in the streets. Right? That was actually something that folks could imagine, could push for, could demand. And so it was both incredibly exciting and then incredibly disappointing that the Trump administration was enforcing. So, the same ideas that Trump put in place in terms of deterrence at the border, where the cruelty was the point of their policies. We're seeing once again the Biden administration using that to no longer migrate. We see the same thing. Trump might be asking for a brick and mortar border wall, But what Biden comes in is asked for is actually a smart wall made out of technology and surveillance.
Yeah.
To more
You're still in
demands
and
to
out,
make more
sister.
radical changes.
Yeah. You're still in and out. I think we got the gist of it, and I'm so sad that we didn't get every single word because your words are so important and your work is so important. But I think it sounded to me as if, really reiterating some of the points that we've been making, talking about other issues, which is, that investment of hope in legislative change or in getting a new guy in office never pays off in the way that people expect it to. And we see echoes of the previous policy, certainly in Biden's policy around immigration, which has a different rhetoric, but has not delivered on the promise of real justice for the immigrant rights community. I wanted to kind of go around. We're nearing the end of our hour together. Time goes fast when you have so much to talk about. There's one other question about neoliberalism, and I wanted to throw that out to you all and then give each of you a chance to offer any final thoughts about, what should movement activists and movement scholars be thinking about as the most important challenges in this next period. And we've been having some of these conversations in the Portal Project, and some people feel, that this growing right-wing threat, the sort of growing vigilantism on the right and violence on the right, that is a huge threat. Other people feel like we're not looking enough at what's happening globally, from the Philippines to Haiti, and that we have to really shift our gaze outward in order to understand what might happen next here. So I want to give you all a chance to weigh in on what you think, what should be our focus of our energy and efforts going forward. And if you want to weave in there something about neoliberalism, someone asked for a definition. And I know as we're assessing shifts in policy in the United States, people are questioning, are there new governing strategies or is neoliberalism still in place? And I don't mean neoliberalism becomes a catchword for like everything bad. It's a very specific governing strategy of racial capitalism, and there are others that can also be bad. So just wondering what folks think is kind of the main challenge, the main contradiction at this moment that we should be thinking about, and how does neoliberalism fit in? And we'll just kind of go around the circle here. And I apologize that we don't have more time, but we have 2 years together. Anybody want to say what are some closing thoughts as we near the end of the hour?
I can start just by saying one of the things I've been thinking about in terms of what today's movements are doing is kind of a helpful way to think about what neoliberalism is, because I think across the left, a lot of the fights are very squarely against neoliberalism. So if you think about prison industrial complex abolition, that is a battle against capitalism, yes, but part of what we know about neoliberalism is it's a governing strategy that focuses on investments in prisons, police, and military, and that shifts a lot of, prior state function into the private sector, creating market solutions for public, political, and economic social problems, along with, carceral solutions. And so whether you're talking about, again, like the PIC abolition campaigns, like No New Jails and Defund the Police, invest in our communities, or you're thinking about like the Green New Deal, or you're thinking about the Protect to Right, the Organize Act, right? Like defanging and undermining unions has been central, and labor power has been central to the neoliberal project. A lot of today's movements, that kind of seems to be, in some sense, squarely where the fight is. And then I guess the only other thought is, I think we're in a really exciting time where there is a lot that's open and there's a sense of potential, and yet we have a really long way to go. So to try to figure out how to feel grounded in the sense of possibility and in the long work ahead, I think is really the important place where we need to be. And I think trying to find a way to, kind of connect the local organizing to organizing around the country and connect our fight so that we can build stronger, sustainable, larger coalitions is going to be really important.
Yeah, I'll just say, echo what Amna has said. I think that in the immediate aftermath of Biden's victory and the kind of big spending that has been absent for decades, that some were asking, is this the end of neoliberalism? Is this the return of a kind of liberal democratic order in the U.S.? And I think that it's a very short-sighted question, and it also underestimates the degree to which ideologically neoliberalism has eroded so much of the sense of public, collective, common responsibility, commonwealth, that has really eroded the bonds that tie us together socially. And the most crude manifestation of that, of course, has been the discourse around personal responsibility and whether to get vaccinated or whether to wear a mask, that it's your personal decision, is kind of the most far-reaching, crude aspect of this. But we see the logics of neoliberalism, personal responsibility, a kind of rugged individualism that still pervades too much of the politics within the U.S. And so I think that the challenges for the left are, what I've mentioned before, but really is, part of building the larger coalitions has to do with solidarity in recognizing the commonalities of our struggles, and that is too linked into the question of internationalism, and not seeing the U.S. as the belly of the beast, but becoming myopic in that and not seeing beyond that, and how do we build national networks, international networks, deepen our politics and understanding of the nature of the crisis, of its manifestation as capitalism, racial capitalism, gender capitalism, nationalist capitalism, and build movements that try to get at the root of that. And so that, I think that there is reasons for optimism. Anytime you have 26 million people protesting, are reasons for optimism. But we have to take advantage of that. And we have to build upon that lasting structures and organization of the sort that their side has in the G7 and all of their international formations that are organized for the immiseration of everyone. And so we have to do that conversely. And that's the challenge. And it's a big challenge, but it's a challenge that we have to take on for the sake of the planet and the sake of ourselves.
Angela Davis, your work has been all over the world. So picking up on Keeanga, what do we need to think about in terms of a global vision?
Well, first of all, I've learned so much from Keeanga and Amna. Thank you so much. And I'm so sorry that we didn't get to hear more from Jacinta, because I think that immigration is one of those global issues. It's one of those issues that demonstrates precisely why we need a robust internationalism to counter the possessive individualism of neoliberalism. And I would say that I think this is what we have to begin to work on. We can draw inspiration from struggles that are unfolding in other parts of the world, and at the same time we build our collectives and we try to do the kind of work that will allow people to recognize themselves within collectives, rather than as abstract individuals. And I'll just say, one thing, that there is the possibility that a Black woman in Colombia, Francia Marquez may run for the president of Colombia. And if we can become involved in these kinds of campaigns, I think that that will help generate the kind of optimism that hopefully will allow us to move over the next generations, at least in the direction of a future of freedom.
Well, thank you so much. I've learned a lot too, stimulating. I'm writing on my little sticky while I'm trying to moderate, what thoughts that all of you have triggered for me. So thank you, Amna. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Keeanga. Thank you, Jacinta. Sorry we couldn't get the full breadth of what she had to offer us, but I think we got the gist of it, and we certainly appreciate her work. And we invite all of you listening to continue to follow the Portal Project and to look for our next public program. We will be having a conference next year, virtual or in person, where many of these voices will be amplified, and we invite many of you to participate with us. So we are smarter together, and we have to keep having these discussions and debates to figure out the best path forward to a more just future. So we're going to close out with a short video. I also want to thank all the behind the scenes folks, the producers and tech folks, Essence McDowell and Noor Shawaf and Bettina Johnson, who will also have helped to make this program possible. So thank all of you for being who you are and doing what you do. And thanks for being with us today. We'll segue to the video.